My name is Sigrid de Vries. I'm Director General of the European Auto Industry Association, ACEA. And today I'm really delighted to be joined by Marc Alouchet, an author and leading researcher from France's renowned École Polytechnique. And Marc recently spearheaded an eye-opening report comparing electric vehicle regulations in China, the US and the EU. Marc, your report really couldn't be more timely. The European automotive industry is undergoing its most significant transformation in the past century, as we are transitioning away from the combustion engine to battery electric vehicles. And maybe first of all, I think it's important to understand that when we talk about electrification, it's not just about changing a technology or changing powertrain, but it's really systemic innovation. And you explain that very clearly in your report. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, you are right. It's a systemic innovation. It's not only the production of the vehicle, but it all starts from raw material extraction, production of electric motor, battery, and it goes till the waste collection and recycling. Consequently, the automotive industry is not the only one involved, but also some related sectors like mining, chemicals, production of electric powertrain, and battery recycling.
Comparing the regulatory framework for electrification of vehicles in the EU, in China, and the US, all three have taken a really very different approach. Maybe we can break that down. So let's start with China. How have they gone about it?
What is very interesting with China is that from the very beginning, in the mid-90s, they had a very comprehensive understanding of overview of the complete value chain. And they have directed massive investments at least between 115 and 150 billion euros until the end of 2022 to develop a full-scale industry. And in addition to that, they have used subsidies on tax credit to improve the performance of vehicles. For instance, the range of battery electric vehicle has increased by 250 kilometers roughly to 400 between 2016 and 2022. And it has also helped very fast market takeoff with an increase of roughly 25% between 2022 and 2023.
So they've really looked at all of the value chain, everything going into the vehicle. And they've also looked, I think, at the market take-up then, right? To create a market for electrification. Very comprehensive approach.
Very comprehensive approach. Industry development, almost from scratch, we can say that. And market take-off.
Going then to the US, what's their approach?
Well, the move in US is much more recent, of course, as the two most important regulations, one being the bipartisan infrastructure law and the second one being very well known in Inflation Reduction Act. They date from 2021 and 2022 respectively. So it's much more recent, but we find the same approach. It's very comprehensive along the complete value chain, and they have massive and very pragmatic funding. This is clearly dedicated to localization and production and market takeoff. Just to give an example, the grant you can have when you purchase a new vehicle of $7,500 is obtained if the vehicle matches some clear condition in terms of localization of production of material processing and production of component of the battery, 40% and 50% in 2023.
Then the EU.
Well, the EU first, what we have to say is that Europe is very unique because there is the only one region to have this very high ambition to have 100% sales of zero-emission vehicle by 2035. This is not the case in the US and in China. But when we make a comparison with China and US, I can say that Europe is in the kind of half full, half empty glass. Of course, by the end of 2023, we have a complete set of regulation covering the complete value chain. But most of these regulations are very recent, and some of them haven't been voted on yet. For instance, the Criterial Raw Material Act, on the Net Zero Industry Act, which are so important for the localization of the battery value chain, that only from March 2023. On their targets, which is 40% of localization for material production and component production, are far behind the ambition of US and obviously far behind the current production capacity in China.
Is it fair to say that the EU, the European Union, has focused more on sticks and the US and China have more focused on carrots? Or is it a different kind of comparison?
In both China, mainly China, they have decided a target and they have defined how to go there. In Europe, you have the target, but the means, how to reach the target, have been defined only very recently. So it's very difficult for the industry. Of course, you know where you have to go, but you don't know how you have to go. So it's quite complicated.
And the US, have they learned from China? Or are they by default more of that approach to?
I think by default they are more to this approach. But on the other side, they have also learned to what happened in California. Because if you remember at the end of the 90s, there was a very strong willingness to have zero-emission vehicles. So they already had an experience about that.
So with China and the US now ramping up efforts to boost their domestic electric vehicle industry, what is at stake if European policymakers fail to act now?
Well, I think we have a very striking example in 2023. The sales of Chinese electric vehicles in Europe are increasing slowly but steadily. In 2019, I think it was about 0.5%, and now it's more than 8% in 2023. And without engaging in any discussion about fair competition or whatsoever, we must recognize that electric vehicles from Chinese automakers, not all of them, but some, are very competitive and have a much better ratio performance than vehicles offered by the global players in Europe. And this is, I think, an important threat for the automotive industry in Europe. And we can also say that the sales of global players in China are going to decrease because Chinese automakers are progressively taking the control of their own market. We can also expect that exportation from Europe to China, for the reason I already explained, and to USA for the localization of conditions defined by the Inflation Reduction Act, are also going to decrease in the forthcoming year.
And in this increasingly competitive environment, is it still possible, in your view, to secure a thriving electric vehicle industry in Europe?
Well, I mean, if we take regulatory perspective, there was a European Battery Alliance, which was launched. And when we have a look at figures, by 2030, roughly estimate 1.1 terawatt-hour of production capacity, with European champions having about 44% of this capacity, and Korean and Chinese roughly 27% each. So it seems that the impetus given by this regulation could bear some fruit. If we look now from an industry perspective, we can also say that all the global players in Europe have now stepped in the production of electric vehicles. They are present at each step of the value chain, differently depending upon the strategy, but they are all present there. And we can also see from recent announcements from Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Renault Group that they have committed to reduce the price of vehicles.
So again, trying to have a look at, because clearly industry needs to act itself, and you've just listed a couple of examples. There will be more models coming on the market soon, also in the more affordable vehicle segments, to be better able to compete. But again, looking at this regulatory framework that is so important to get this systemic innovation to fruition, to materialize, what more should policymakers do to enable now implementation of the Green Deal, to enable the establishment of a competitive electric vehicle industry in Europe?
Well, what I've described, in fact, is a piecemeal approach to the development of the electric vehicle industry. And now what is absolutely needed is to have an industrial policy. And that should be the main focus for policymakers in Europe. And I think we can distinguish two different steps. The first one is how can we fix the issues in the very short term, which are, in fact, supply of raw materials and establishment of the battery value chain, where we have seen that, in fact, the targets are far behind what should be needed to really have a localization of the battery value chain in Europe. If we move one step forward, basically the regulation should be in a position to be a game changer for what's going to happen next. And we know that we may have some difficulty to get raw material. There is a very strong presence of Chinese company on mining and production of materials. And basically, if you want to change that, you need to have some R&D program, some industrialization program to find new technology and not to be dependent anymore on producing countries for raw material of processed materials.
So you've mentioned piecemeal approach. You've mentioned the necessity to focus on establishing a battery value chain. Battery regulation could mean a game changer, but it needs to happen. What are the other elements to address the challenges that we face?
I think there are three other elements. The first one is the automotive industry in Europe need to have more competitive vehicles than they have now. So I think the regulatory framework should help the industry to develop more affordable vehicles and also vehicles with probably a different trade-off between the capacity of the battery and charger network. So it goes directly to the next point, which is to accelerate the development of the charging network with fast charger, so you can enable to have some different options, not only battery with high capacity, but maybe vehicle with smaller battery, but the capacity to recharge more frequently. So I think this is another point. And the last one is clearly about recycling, battery recycling. There is a lot of opportunities there. It's not happening tomorrow because, of course, you need to have battery to recycle, so it's not tomorrow. But it's a very complex ecosystem. Again, this is, I would say, it's systemic innovation in the bigger systemic innovation. Many stakeholders are involved. And if you really want to have this battery recycling business operational in time, I think you need to start pretty soon. And I think this is another issue where policy makers should facilitate the way for the industry.
Battery value chain, recycling at the end of the equation, and then supporting the manufacturing of affordable electric vehicles in Europe in a way that makes the actual manufacturing affordable. And are we then talking about subsidies or about energy prices, or what elements would we need to think about there with a view on what policymakers could do to support this?
I think what is very efficient in the US is the way they incentivize production, local production. And of course, probably I don't have the answer, but having some production credit, for instance, to develop more affordable vehicle would be a real way to help the industry to do that. Because it's really a game changer. I mean, everybody is used to have a vehicle and you can drive 600 or 700 kilometers. Basically, this is what people would like to do tomorrow. But that would be very costly to do that with battery electric vehicles. So you need to find another way. If you want to have vehicles which are less expensive, again, coming back to what I said previously, it means that you need to have another trade-off between the size of the battery and the capacity of the charging network, and probably the dimension of the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle, the air resistance of the vehicle. So I think that having some production or design credit as well to support the industry to do that would be a good way.
And of course, in Europe, we have a very broad range of vehicles produced, from small cars to bigger cars to also trucks, buses, coaches. But I think that's exactly the point, right? To have a healthy and thriving auto industry supporting overall economy and economic growth in Europe, we need this broad range of vehicles produced.
Exactly. And this is why I think it's not so easy, in fact, for the industry to change, because they are now very profitable with high-range vehicles, and all the automakers making a lot of money with that. And obviously, they need to keep doing that, because you don't kill your darling, as you can say. Okay? But on the other side, they also need to start developing this much more affordable vehicle. So obviously, they need some support to do that.
So thank you very much, Mark, for all these revealing insights. It's such a vast and crucial topic for Europe, and there's really so much at stake. And what is clear is that the EU must change its strategy now. To summarize, provocatively maybe, but one could say that while China directs and the US incentivizes, the EU rather regulates. And the question is really if there could be an alternative model for Europe. Could there be an industry deal to complement the Green Deal? Now, I'll leave that open question with you, our audience, to chew on a bit. And I'd like to thank you, Mark, for being with us today. And I'd like to thank the audience for staying with us for what I hope you'll agree was a very insightful discussion. And I can only encourage you to check out the full report that Mark wrote, which is accessible also via a link on the ACEA website, and as well also our ACEA Future-Driven Manifesto on a competitive European auto industry, again via the links on our website. So thank you very much.
ACEA, driving mobility for Europe.